so what we found for the whole profession is the average chiropractic clinic across the country has a 20% schedule utilization, or percentage of schedule filled. And so what that means is that they could see 5 times or they could generate potentially 5 times more revenue out of their current location with no more hours, no more staff, if they just maximize what they already have.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to ChiroRx, where we talk business growth for, well, chiropractors. I'm sitting down with Josiah Fitzsimmons, and we are talking about a strategy that most doctors would consider financial suicide: closing your clinic every single Tuesday. But here's the kicker: Josiah is doing nearly $7 million a year with a single location. We're talking about how to stop practicing on your patients and how to build a mission-driven team that runs like Disney. If you feel like you're hitting a ceiling, or if you're curious on how the average clinic is sitting on 5x increase in revenue without increasing overhead of any shape or form, this is the episode for you. Let's dive in. Josiah, welcome to the show, man. I'm gonna jump right into this and hit off with a big hitter. So you run a clinic doing nearly $7 million a year. Yet you completely shut the doors to patients every single Tuesday. And so I know for most clinic owners and most doctors, that sounds like financial suicide. Why do you do it?
Great question. I love that right off the bat, because that's why we're successful all the other days. That's how you get to 7 million. I mean, I want to get to my one clinic to $10 million a year, but you can't do it without your team being mission driven, on board, know exactly what to do in the hours that you are open. One of my favorite analogies is the Olympics and the 100-meter dash, and people train for 4 years to run for, 9.5 seconds. And that's really where I think a lot of people miss the mark, is they're practicing on their patients. They're practicing on the people that are coming in the front door instead of practicing on each other.
That's interesting. Okay, so tell me more about that. Why is that the most important lever that needs to be pulled for a business owner to find more success?
It's really about being crisp and quality every single time. In our practice, we call it the Disney experience. Every sight, sound, smell, touch, feel, it all adds up into an incredible, magical experience. And that just doesn't happen, overnight. Walt Disney World, they literally have vacuums underneath trash cans so that nobody ever has to walk around and see somebody literally taking trash bags out of trash cans. You'll never see somebody at Disney World piling up trash bags, because they literally created a vacuum system where it's impossible for even trash collectors to be seen during the day. That's like next level ingenuity and thinking, to create magical experience. And so, that's what happens on Tuesday. We shut the whole office down. Every single individual department has a meeting. Every single team member has a one-on-one with their direct report. We do an all team meeting. We do all team training. We do department training. We do individual training. And we're trying to figure out what's working, what's not working. What do we got to go deeper on? How do we come up with a game plan to get better the next day, the next shift, and just continual constant improvement.
Dive more into the Disney experience for me. I love the analogy. I actually ironically watched a whole documentary about Disney recently, and I don't know how much you know about the original build at Disney, but the amount of money that they wasted and just like pissed into trying to get the initial Disney built was astronomical, and nobody believed it would be a success, and everyone thought it was going to be a failure, and they put just millions and millions and millions, and timeline kept getting longer. And then obviously now we know Disney and what it is today. But I'm curious as to tell me more about what that actually means as a chiropractic practice.
Yeah, so one thing I talked to a lot of doctors about is we're selling something that's not tangible. We're a service-based profession. And so when you walk into a store, you walk out typically with a bag, you walk out with a watch, you walk out with a product, something that's tangible that you can touch and feel and say, I purchased this. I'm walking out with this tangible product. When you walk into a chiropractic clinic and you walk back out, you're not walking out typically with anything except a better functioning nervous system. And so, you might not be able to feel that immediate improvement. And so all these little things have to add up throughout the experience so that you actually physically understand the difference. And so for practice members to come into our clinic, we have to do all those little details right, because our head doctor always tells all of our doctors, you're only as good as your last adjustment. And you could provide amazing care for years and years and years, and you have one bad experience and someone may never want to come again, right? You could go to an amazing, restaurant for years and years and you have one bad experience, or maybe the first time you go, you didn't like the food and you never will try that restaurant again because one time the waiter didn't do a good job. One time your water took too long to get filled up, right? And so are the mistakes still going to happen? Are we going to be perfect every day? Absolutely not, right? But it's a numbers game, right? And if I can try and be better slightly better than I was the day before, slightly better than I was the day before that. We talk a lot about 1% constant continual improvement. If you improve 1% a day, you're 37 times better in 365 days. And so that's just that continual constant drip feed. And so every single Tuesday, that's why we shut the office down, to just get 1% better, whether it be at our verbiage at the front desk, whether it be at our customer service experience. And we train our doctors, when someone takes their glasses off to get adjusted, they literally use their own shirt, clean the person's glasses, and hand them back to them, when they give them back to us. When it's raining outside, we bring out a bucket of umbrellas, and we have a specific team member that's their only job, is to walk people to and from their cars when it's raining outside. If someone has a coat, we get the coat off the coat rack for them and help put it on their put it back on them, when they're leaving the office, right? And someone comes into the front office desk for the very first time, we already have their name memorized because we know everyone else by their face. So if a brand new person comes in, new patient at 2:00, we know exactly that's Susan. Even though we've never seen Susan before, our team members can actually greet Susan by name, and they walk around the front desk and greet her face to face, not just stand, stick behind the front desk. Right. So there's all these little minor things. One thing in and of itself might not mean very much, but 1%, 1%, 1%.
How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You must be familiar then with the book Extreme Hospitality. This is actually, Unreasonable Hospitality, not Extreme Hospitality. The guy of 11 Madison Park, the restaurant guy. I can't think of his name right now.
Yeah, I actually went to that restaurant. Yeah, it's actually an awesome restaurant. Yeah.
Really? Did you go when it was vegan, or were they serving meat when you went?
They had meat when I was there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I know they went through like a transition where like they tried to do like this like vegan thing. It was like upscale vegan or vegetarian, and now maybe they're back on meat again. So it depends on when you went. Because yeah, but anyways, phenomenal book. Obviously, it seems like you've obviously integrated a lot of the stuff. One of my favorite stories from that is like talking about the Dreamweavers, which obviously I'm sure you're familiar with that. But I'm wondering, you gave a bunch of examples that I really like. What are some other examples for like creating this experience that might surprise a doctor? Like, what are some of the things that you guys have thought up to do to create this remarkable experience? And most docs would like just to be like, wow, I never even thought about that. Or like, I can't even believe like they're doing that at that practice. Like, do you have examples of that?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, a lot of them are little. Like one of the biggest things we do in the office is what we call the card tracker. So time someone has a birthday, they get a card. If their dog passed away, we send them a card. If they graduate high school, we send them a card. If they get a new job, we send them a card. If their grandma passed away, we send them a card. If they do anything worth celebrating or anything, that we want to have empathy for, sympathy for, we send them a card. So all day long, our team members are sending through our system, add Susan to card tracker, got an A on her test, add, John to the card tracker, his mother passed away, and so we're then writing these handwritten cards that are signed by all the team members, on a constant, consistent basis. And so it's just those little touches. The other big thing about our clinic is we really work to make the patient experience very efficient, very streamlined, so that they can get the best quality care, because in a chiropractic clinic, especially on the front end, most corrective care clinics, you're seeing people 3 times a week or 2 times a week. And so how can you make those visits as efficiently as possible, with your systems, with your processes, with your doctors, with your adjusting technique, with your notes, all of these little minor details. I mean, I counted the steps, that I had to take to make sure I could adjust more efficiently. We tracked, the numbers, and we picked our EHR system very particularly to make sure that we can be more efficient. So there's just these little things that just add up, to have a great experience.
I got to scratch this itch. Do you use a project management system? And the reason I asked that question is because I did a podcast interview earlier this week with Nikki Kotis, I think is how you pronounce her last name. And she said that they use ClickUp, which is, I'm very familiar with ClickUp. It's a project management system, but I'm curious if you guys use anything like that, because there's got to be a way you're tracking all of these systems, right?
I mean, I do use Trello currently, but I'm familiar with ClickUp as well, but we don't, for most of the stuff that you're talking about is Google Docs, that I'm talking about Google Docs, Google Sheets.
Wow. Rudimentary basics. I like it. Keep it simple. Before we get into some of the heavy data stuff, which I know is going to be part of this conversation, you grew up with, I think it was 8 siblings, a mom who delivered newspapers, a dad who waited tables. How did growing up in such humble beginnings shape you to be so aggressive right out of school and to like, I think when we chatted last time I saw you at TRP, the scale at which you grew your practice is crazy. Talk about maybe some of those humble beginnings.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, for me, I mean, there's this competitive nature at the dinner table. If I didn't eat my food fast enough, I didn't get seconds, and if I didn't, fight hard enough, I wouldn't get to play with the football or whatever it is growing up with that many kids in a low income household. When I bought my car in college, I bought this salvage titled Ford Focus, and I paid $2,700 for it, and it was by far the nicest car my family ever had. When I was in college. I mean, usually most cars were either given to us or we paid $500 for them. Usually my mom picked us up at school and there was smoke coming out of her, hood. And so that was just the normal life, growing up. So, and with that many siblings, chaos honestly was normal. Jumping from one thing to another, having lots of things going on simultaneously was just like my normal life. I delivered newspapers starting in third grade. I woke up at 2:30 a.m. and delivered newspapers from 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. all the way till high school. Before I went to third grade, I'd already worked for 4 hours. And so it's just like my normal life. It sounds crazy, to other people. My wife was just like in disbelief when I would tell her about my childhood and some of those different things that were just completely normal for me, but not for other people. And so now, I'm trying to build a business and I'm trying to manage staff and I'm trying to have family and do all these different things, multitasking and managing all these different things just never really caused me lots of stress, where a lot of people, they'd never done maybe some bigger things like that. And mine things were still, again, small scale, but it's just years of experience and repetition with that many siblings in a small house and low income and, just fighting and scrapping, every single day.
Did this carry over to your siblings as well? Or was this the unique trait set that grew out of you personally?
It's a great question. I would say that it didn't hit all my siblings for sure. There's a couple of my siblings that have some go-getter attitude. A couple of them I think was more, negative and detrimental, to the outcomes of their life, because and it's hard to know. That's a lot of people have kind of asked me that question. It's like, how come you turned out differently, whereas some of your other siblings maybe didn't, have that same growth, out of the childhood that you had. And I honestly don't have a good answer to that. I don't know what really separated me in that. At the end of the day, I just, always had goals and ambitions. And, it really started in high school for me. I was really big into soccer growing up, but then I started getting really good at football, and I knew I wasn't going to have any support to go to college or pay for college. And so I realized, hey, if I can work hard at this, maybe I get a football scholarship. And so, after my sophomore year of high school, I like dedicated, to learn how to learn nutrition, learn weightlifting, learn athletic performance, all on my own. Asked a lot of questions, trying to find people that could teach me things to just become as good of an athlete as possible. And ultimately that helped me get a, full ride Division I football scholarship. And that was really kind of the first thing that I realized, holy cow, like I am in control of my own destiny. If I put in the work, I put in the time, I work smart and I work hard, I can really accomplish whatever I want to do. And so then that's what carried me then, into chiropractic school and beyond.
Carol Dweck would call it a growth mindset. I had similar challenges when I was younger as well. I didn't have necessarily like treacherous upbringings, but I did definitely when I was younger adopt what's called a fixed mindset, which basically means that like I just thought I was born dumb and I'd never be able to accomplish anything and I had no potential future. And I just thought I was always just going to be, this like lazy, poor, struggling person my entire life until I learned about that concept of like you can create your own destiny if you're willing to work for it. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I've heard you say that one of the biggest challenges for clinic owners is understanding structure versus systems. What's the difference? Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I think it's actually the number one missing piece in the entire chiropractic profession is structure. And I didn't learn about it until my third year in practice. Most doctors operate very much on systems. They have a day one, they have a day two. This is what we do for table talk. This is our reactivation, protocol. I mean, our card tracker, all these things I'm even talking about. These are just systems that you have in place. These are SOPs that you have documented of how you do this and how you do that. And you can systematize a lot of things, even, a lot of adjusting, it's like, okay, you find this marker, you find this analysis, okay, this equals, this X-ray analysis, this is the way you adjust it. Those are all systems, but structure, is an organization of those systems and an accountability system based around KPIs, key performance indicators, and holding people accountable to specific structure. So I didn't learn about that, like I said, until my third year in practice, but that was really what helped me then jump from 2 million to 5.5 million in only 1 year, is when I learned about structure and really understanding, who's accountable for what in the practice, what KPIs does each person need to be held accountable for, what are core values, all these things that are just structural pieces and fundamental foundational things so that you can keep growing and scaling as a business. Structure is like foundation of your house. If you don't have a good foundation, you can't, go anywhere up. And so many people don't have good structure. They have good systems, but then they can't go and get to the next level. And that's why so many chiropractors become, very much, solopreneurs or only have a few staff. If they leave for vacation, clinic can't run without them. And so structure is what allows you to say, hey, this specific role is accountable for these specific tasks, these specific KPIs are what they're accountable to. This is their performance review. These are the core values of the organization, and then you can have specific reviews of those individuals so that you can continue to delegate and elevate, to new levels.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, is it safe to say that the systems is more or less just like the procedure and the structure is the actual, like, maybe person or team that is accountable for executing on those systems? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say the people in the team are a part of the structure. At its very basic form, structure is an org chart, or an accountability chart, and everyone's key purpose, key role, KPIs.
Huh. Interesting. Let's talk about the data a little bit. You mentioned there's a specific metric almost no chiropractors track that I'm sure it's costing them a lot of money. What is scheduled utilization? I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, I think it's the number one stat that nobody tracks, and I think it should be the number one stat in the entire profession. But it's what percentage of that schedule is actually being utilized. So first, you need to figure out what is your schedule potential to begin with. And so the easiest way I always talk with doctors is think about next week. You have 1,000 new patients sitting at your front door in a line, like they're waiting to get tickets to a Taylor Swift concert. They're sitting outside of your front office door, waiting for a new patient assessment in your office because you're a celebrity and they want to come to your clinic. Without changing your hours, without changing your staff, without you working any harder than you currently are, okay, how many of those new patients could you actually let through the door and process with your current team, space, and hours, right? And so most people are like, okay, I could do one new patient every 30 minutes. Maybe I could do one every hour, depending on their staff, if their doctor, how many team members they have, who needs to be involved. Like I said, we're just taking new patients as an example. You need to know your schedule utilization, or I like to call it percentage of schedule filled for every single appointment type. But let's just say new patients, for example, let's just say typical clinic open about 20 office hours a week. You can see one new patient every hour, then that would mean that you could potentially see 20 new patients a week, 4.3 weeks in a month, 86 new patients a month. Okay. Now, in the last historical 6 to 12 months, how many new patients have you actually averaged on a monthly basis? Call it 20 new patients a month, right? So 20 divided by 86, that would be your schedule utilization percentage. So in this example, it'd be around 23% or so. And so what we found for the whole profession is the average chiropractic clinic across the country has a 20% schedule utilization, or percentage of schedule filled. And so what that means is that they could see 5 times, or they could generate potentially 5 times more revenue out of their current location with no more hours, no more staff, if they just maximize what they already have. And so that's the biggest thing is, whether your schedule is 100% full, 50% full, 23% full, your rent doesn't change, your electric bill doesn't change, utilities don't change, your student loan bill doesn't change, your payroll doesn't change. Most all of your expenses do not change whatsoever, whether your schedule is 100% full, 20% full, or 50% full. And so the whole entire premise is knowing, what your capacity is, knowing where you currently are, and then the whole entire goal is to try and maximize what you're already paying for. Because with a service-based business, again, it doesn't, if I adjust 5 people or I adjust 10 people an hour, it doesn't cost me any more money. Maybe as a restaurant or someone with a product, that's obviously going to cost, that's going to be an expense, to sell more products, right? But in a service-based business, it doesn't cost any more at all to deliver more adjustments. It doesn't cost any more to deliver a $50 adjustment than it does a $100 adjustment, right? And so really understanding the financial economics behind that really helps people have much more clarity on action steps, because that's really the whole gap is maximize your schedule. And then what's getting maximized? Did you hit a ceiling because of your hours? Did you hit a ceiling because of your team, or was it because of your space? Those are the typical three variables. 99% of the time, it's going to be team members first. It's going to be a team member capacity first and foremost. Then after you fix your team, add more team, boom, boom. I mean, like I said, I got to 5.5 million in 1,800 square feet. Then you might need to increase some hours, right? And then once you increase your hours, then maybe you could add more team, right? And then it's going to be team, and then maybe a few more hours, right? And then eventually, you might have to get a bigger space, right? But a lot of people think they need a bigger space immediately, but they just are running like inefficient systems, and they're not maximizing what they're already paying for.
What about the doctor that's maybe thinking to themselves of like, okay, I feel like what Josiah is saying here is that basically I just need to see as many patients as possible and as small amount of time as possible. Is that what you're saying, or is that not what you're saying?
No, I mean, that's just part of it. I mean, obviously seeing more people, and seeing them more efficiently, is a variable. But I'm like, what I'm saying is don't change anything. Don't change. If you spend 15 minutes a visit, if you change 30 minutes a visit, if you spend an hour with every single individual patient, that's totally, whatever your protocols are, but are you maximizing, the time that you're already paying for? Are you maximizing your own time, your staff's time, those different, if you have an associate doctor, and they can adjust, call it 2 people every 15 minutes, and they can adjust 8 people every hour. And they're, you're paying them 40 hours a week, but your clinic's only open for 18 hours. I see this all the time. The clinic's only open for 18 hours. They're paying their associate 40-hour a week salary, and they're only open for 18 hours, and they're averaging, 18. Let me get out my calculator here. Let's just say it's my hypothetical example of, 8 times, 18 in that example, that doctor could see 144 people in those 18 hours, but you're paying them for a 40-hour salary, so let's just say even if you got them to adjust for, like 32 hours, which is like my clinic, and it was seeing 8 an hour, that associate, hypothetically could do 256, right? So again, the same exact set pay, the same, expenses not changing, but potentially you only utilizing 50% of what you're paying for.
So what, I guess this begs the question then. So how does, I guess maybe let's just use you as example. What are you doing to fully optimize and maximize your schedule? I mean, yeah, let's just start there. Like, what are you actually doing? Is it based on, are you just like, are you tracking a doctor while they're in the room? Are you like, what are you doing exactly?
Yeah, I mean, all of our doctors know their percentage of schedule fills as they report on it every single week. In our team meeting, they know exactly where they're at, where they stand. And so, yeah, I mean, as an owner, as a CEO of the business, my doctors, aren't as involved much at all in marketing, right? So my goal is to help fill their schedules as best as possible. And so now you're getting into, okay, now what is my ability to fill their schedules? And so now we're getting into more of a marketing question, which I know you like, and really at this point, now you need to understand how much can you spend to acquire a new patient, because oftentimes when you go to different conferences, you said you're going to a couple here shortly, people are always saying, hey, Corey, how much what do you recommend? How much should I spend on marketing, on ads? Or you ask another person, oh, how much are you spending? Or how much are you spending? And none of that matters. What the answer to the question isn't how much should you spend, it's how much can you spend based on knowing your individual data points. And so there's a couple different equations that I'm a big fan of tracking, but the most simplistic one that I tell everybody that they should definitely be able to do is what I call 100 divided by profit margin. 100, if your profit margin is 30%, 100 divided by 30 that means you need 3.3x return on marketing to break even. If you have a 20% profit margin, 100 divided by 20, you need a 5x return on marketing. If you have a 40% profit margin, you need a 2.5x return on marketing. So let's just say it's 20%, profit margin, you need a 5x return. So if you spend $1,000 on marketing, you need that to generate $5,000 in revenue, because 20% of 5,000 is 1,000. So that'd be your profit on 1,000 spins. So you spend 1,000, you got $1,000 in profit, you're break even. So that's really the most basic equation that I teach doctors is if you just know your true profit margin, and most people don't know their true profit margin, they know their taxable profit margin because they're baking in, their restaurants, their vacations, their trips, their kitchen remodels. Some people try and squeeze into their clinic, P&L. And so then their profit margin doesn't look as good, and they're basing their numbers and their decisions off bad data. So, obviously I love data, but you have to have good data first and foremost, then you can start making decisions with the data, because knowing your data is 1% value. Knowing what to do with the data is 99% of the value.
This typically isn't a sexy topic for a lot of doctors, but what are some of the data averages that you see? Because I know you look at a lot of clinics and you look at a lot of data. I'd be curious as to like what are some of the numbers that I guess the averages that you see for clinics in terms of like some of the basic stuff like cost per click or LTV or new patient, like whatever you think the top ones are, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest one that we talk a lot about is team cost. Team cost is by far the number one line item on a P&L. Again, hit the nail on his head. We're a service-based business. People are by far our number one asset. And that's just something that's really missing. I think a lot of doctors look at team members more as liabilities. Hey, this is my biggest expense. HR, people are frustrating, but you really got to shift your mindset around team to view them, like I said, as more as assets than liabilities. But you really got to maximize your team because that's where your most expense is. So drilling down to that whole bucket of team expense is really the first and foremost thing that you want to do, and then like I said, from a marketing perspective, what are you getting the best ROI? And you can look at marketing overall holistically, but then drilling down into individual marketing strategies and then individual, campaigns within those. Profit margin, is a big other one, that we talk a lot about. I'm a big proponent. You'd much rather have 20% of a watermelon than 40% of a grape, right? And a lot of people just don't have the confidence, to reinvest back into their business, whether it be marketing or team, because they don't understand the ROI on that reinvestment, because they're not confident in their numbers, and therefore they have paralysis by analysis, or they just have no idea and they just hold off and they don't make decisions because they don't have the insight if that's the right or wrong choice.
Speaking of team, it seems like there's a misconception around owners that believe that their team is an expense. I would have willing to bet that you don't necessarily agree with that statement. I'd be curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, by far the biggest asset in your organization is your team. Early on when I was like HR, you just hear the word HR, for me. And then at least I thought, I was like, HR literally stands for human resources. Like when you think of a resource, you're thinking oil, gas, gold, silver, everybody, wants more of those, and that should be like HR. You should want higher quality and more. Okay. And that's how you're going to scale. If you want to have your clinic run without you, if you want to get to the next level, it's going to be determined based on the quality and the number of people that you have within your organization that can advance the mission, while you're on vacation.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet that like for most high earning clinics that the team is probably the biggest bottleneck, I'd have to guess. How does let's dive into that a little bit. I mean, what have you been able to do, or what do you see other clinics do that have allowed them to build more successful, better teams, find good hires? Because I know that's like one of the biggest challenges of so many docs that I talk to is just hiring in general. What have you found to work well?
I would say going back to structural piece, first and foremost, you need to figure out, what is your bus that you're going to let people on? And that's having defined core values. And core values aren't just some cliche thing on the wall. It's actually, what are the values, if you're going to let people into your organization. For us, communication, excellence, takes initiatives, accountability. Those are some of our core values that we're trying to identify from the very beginning. If someone's not aligned with those core values, they could be the most skilled individual possible. There's just no seat for them within the organization. If they pass the core value test, then you need to figure out what skills, talents, and abilities do they have that line up with a specific role in your organization, right? So every position, on that org chart or accountability chart needs to have very defined, this is the right personality for this role. This is the profile I'm looking for. This is the deliverable of this position. And these are the KPIs of this position. And so that needs to be very clearly lined out so you can have proper expectations in the hiring process that you're looking for someone that can deliver the core values of the company and then the key roles of that position. And so oftentimes, and I was, victim of this myself. You hire someone who's good at interviewing, and if you want someone who's running your back office and checking insurance and verifying codes and auditing accounts, and they're a terrible interview. I mean, this is a nerd that's in the back office on spreadsheets, and you're not hiring them because they delivered a good interview. And we had the hardest time hiring any back office people because they all sucked at interviews. And then I realized they're not going to be good at interviews. They're a back office person who doesn't like to talk to people. And I'm basing hiring them off of if they're good at communicating in an interview.
I've never thought about that until you described it, but now it makes so much sense. And it's funny too, as somebody, obviously my whole business is online. I don't have like a brick and mortar like most practices, but I guess I've never realized it's actually kind of worked in my favor that I've never actually met a lot of people that work for me. And like when you think about the marketing world as a whole, I would say most of them actually probably aren't like super duper people, I guess you could say. They kind of like, teching out and nerding out and being behind the scenes, and they don't want to be like the front man. And I guess I've never thought about it till you just described that. So it's actually really interesting. But
yeah, it took me a lot of years to learn. I mean, we had the hardest time finding back office people, and we'd hire back office people that weren't good at their job and they weren't detail oriented, and then you had to flip the whole script on that.
yeah, that makes so much sense now that you describe it. And I did notice too, I want to double tap on this, that you mentioned when you listed what you're looking for, the first thing you said was personality. Was that intentional?
Oh yeah, I mean, we have a personality profile detailed out for every single individual position. They take a personality test. If they don't get at least a 4 or 5 star alignment with that personality for that position, we have zero interest in them.
I actually just recently, on my last flight, took the most robust personality test I've ever taken in my life. So it was built with this like AI platform, and it asked me, I'm not kidding you, Josiah, everything, to the point where it's like it knew all my like potentials for anxiety and depression. Fun fact, I don't have autism, so that's cool. But it had like so many questions on this personality test, and it was like it gave me this like detailed AI report, and then I could take this report and I put it into my Claude, and now I have like a regular professional life coach, I guess you could say, with all my personality. It's just like it was the most robust test I've ever taken. It took me like probably, I don't know, 30, 45 minutes to complete this thing. But it was dramatically helpful. And it looks at so many areas of literally every area of life, I guess you could say. But it was super helpful. But I should send it to you. But
yeah, I'd love to check it out.
But I love, as you mentioned earlier, I love a good marketing strategy. And I know you've had a lot of success with health talks and even doing live TV, which I actually find kind of interesting. How do you know it's a good time to like double down on some of this stuff, or when to just like cut it off and like totally give up on that marketing effort?
Yeah, 100 divided by profit margin. That's all it is to it, and percentage of schedule filled. I mean, those two stats, those two things right there. You could know those two things and nothing else, and run the whole business. You know what percentage of schedule filled is. You're not where you want to be, and you know exactly how much you can spend to acquire a person, and that's it. Because then as long as you're above that threshold, but you're not at full utilization, then you're going to keep spending, to fill your schedule. Because again, it doesn't cost me any more, to have a 100% full schedule than a 50% full schedule. So that's really what it comes down to, is if you understand those numbers, then you have confidence. And so, like I said, whether it's a TV interview, whether it's a health talk, a screening, a Facebook ad, a Google ad, SEO, you name it, the biggest thing is just, can you track it and tie it into that data, to know what the return on that investment is. Now, there's also short-term and long-term, right? If you're saying, hey, I'm only going to give this 30 days, and the people that come in for the next 30 days and you're, pay per visit, or, depending on how you do your collections, then it might be more difficult, whereas, I like to base it on the length of the cost of their initial care plan is how we do it, and so when they come in, someone signs up for care, I give the full value, of that care plan to that marketing strategy. So if someone comes in from a Facebook ad, for example, and they sign up for a $4,000 care plan, they might be spreading it out over 4 months, but I'm going to assign that value immediately, to that marketing strategy, to help me calculate the ROI of that strategy for that 30-day window. But anything with data, the more, longer time horizon that you can spread out what you're looking at, you're going to get more and more accurate, and so again, some of them are harder to track than others. For all of our different TV ads and stations and commercials, we have individual phone numbers for every one of them. Our Google ads, we have different phone numbers, you tracking the data can definitely be a beast. And so that can be tough, but it's very, very important. Otherwise, you could totally cut off a channel that's crushing it. One mistake that we've made, is running ads on Facebook, but then our, text messages are saying, hey, here's a link to our website to go sign up. So then we had all these leads being attributed to our website that were actually coming from Facebook because we were sending them to our website to sign up. Right. And so that can happen a lot with your website. If someone sees you at this marketing channel, then they go to your website and they sign up. But the only reason they went to your website is because you did a health talk at their business to begin with. Right. And so we were very meticulous on lead attribution and, making sure that we try and assign them as best as possible, to where they actually heard about us.
Yeah, as somebody who does marketing, Josiah, I feel like 80% of my job is lead attribution. Is like, how the hell do we figure out what we actually did to get us this lead? It is a constant battle. I was actually just on a call with a buddy of mine who's going to be helping out with some of the AI stuff that we want to start doing. And like, talk about the world's most challenging way to try to figure out of like if any of the efforts you did actually created a prompt query that somehow led to a new patient. It's like the most impossible thing to figure out of all time. Honestly, like, I'd be curious as your thoughts on this. What I've determined is really going to be the only way to figure this out is to literally just make sure your front desk asks people where the hell they came from. Is like, I feel like the only way to get like decently accurate information on this stuff, because otherwise you're just dealing with what's called the messy middle. Is like, maybe they saw an ad and maybe they got retargeted and maybe they decided to do an AI search and then they somehow ended up in as a new patient. It's like, well, I don't know what the hell we did worked. So yeah, I'd be curious as to like what you found to be the best way to make sure you have good lead attribution.
Yeah, I mean, we really have multi-layered approaches. Like I said, we got a phone number that directly tied to a specific marketing channel. We have our high level connected, to Facebook, so that what's the last touch attribution, to tag them as that. The person that takes the phone call or talks to the person individually asked how they heard about us. We have it on their paperwork that they fill out, how they heard about us. And if we still at that point don't know, then the person, at the front desk or the person doing the initial consultation can get clarification about how they heard about us. So there's numerous touch points along the way to try and make sure that we find Waldo.
Good way to describe it. What's been the success for the live TV stuff? I mean, that just seems like such a untapped. It almost feels like you said to me, like, yeah, we run newspaper ads. It's like, really? Like that's working?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually had some really good success with newspaper ads at one point. I mean, I'm just a big proponent of trying, lots of different strategies and, tracking them and measuring them. And some might take off that you're least surprised. I mean, we had our best strategy for like 2 full years was direct mail. I mean, that literally was our best strategy by far we ever did for 2 straight years. And then it fell off a cliff. And I don't know exactly why it stopped working, but I'm glad we did it for the 2 years that we did. For live TV interviews. Yeah, we have just a couple local ABC and NBC stations that have, lunchtime shows. And I go on there and I do 5-minute live TV interviews every single week. And, we used to get 20 phone calls every single time I was on there, people scheduling. It's not as good as it used to be. Yeah, I mean, you never know a lot of these different strategies until you try them. I just talked to this guy out in South Carolina that's a Luco client, and he just did every door direct mail for a dinner, and he had 120 registrants for this dinner. He had to have a wait list because he couldn't even fit them all. I was like, what? Couldn't believe it. So it's different markets too, what, depending on where you live, the different demographics in your area, the different protocols that you offer. There definitely in some areas, Facebook ads are just absolutely awful. In some other areas, Google ads crush. In other areas, TV might be really good. In other areas, direct mail, and so you need to, dabble at least in a little bit of those over time, in your area, and you might find that something that you had no idea could do really, really well could take off.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of alludes back to our previous conversation of like, how do you know when to double down and how do you know when to kill it? And I guess you kind of spoke to it right there in a nutshell is like, you never know if a newspaper ad will work until you try. And yeah. But you mentioned Lucro briefly there for the listener that maybe has no idea what the hell that is or what we're talking about. Can we maybe talk for a second about Lucro, company you founded? It's basically, I know it's helping people understand their financial data and helping them scale. So if an owner is listening right now and wants to like get a little bit more clarity on their numbers, maybe let's talk about what you do and how they can figure that stuff out.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it really was born out of necessity for myself as I was trying to scale. I needed to understand my own data so that I could make the best decisions possible. And so I would always ask other doctors, like, what is the right amount that I should be spending on my team? What is the ideal profit margin? What's the right amount I should, my overhead, should be? Nobody had these real answers. I'm like, well, there's got to be an ideal model. There's got to be an ideal answer. I'm a big proponent of that. Like when I went to chiropractic school, it's like, what's the best technique? I want to be the best chiropractor. And everyone's like, oh, there's 100 different ones, whatever your heart moves you. I'm like, that's not how science works at all. Like, nope, that's not true. Like, there's got to be something that's the best, And so that was just like scaling a business. I'm like, there's got to be tried and true best practices, to scale and continue growing to the next level. And one of them is knowing your financial data. And so as I scaled really quickly, a lot of doctors started, just asking me generally like, hey, what are you doing? Like, you're just growing year after year faster than any clinic I've ever heard of. What are you doing differently? And I said, I know my numbers. I know exactly what to do. I have extreme confidence in the next best steps, what I should keep doing, what I should stop doing, what I should do more of. And they're like, oh, help me. And I'm like, okay, what are your numbers? And then crickets, nobody has any idea what their numbers are. And then the few that were like, oh yeah, here's my numbers. And then they're like, what do I do with these numbers? Like, is that good? Is that bad? What should I do more of that less? So I'm like I said earlier, that's what I realized, like 1% value knowing your numbers. You have to know them, but it's only 1% value. If you know them, you don't do anything, who cares? 99% value knowing what to do with your numbers. And so that's the whole premise of Lucro, is I realized I was getting all this messy data from them because it was poor data. They had bookkeepers, that were months behind, that were running all their personal expenses through the business. And so their data was only valuable the one day of the year they filed taxes. And so I'm like, okay, we got to get this figured out. Partner with my friend who was CFO for multiple $100 million companies. And so, yes, that's what Lucro was created. We do your bookkeeping every single week, and then we give you a financial report every single month based off your data, what's working, what's not working, what action steps you need to do, to scale and get to the next level. So for the cost of, I like to tell people, we're usually cheaper than a cost of a crappy bookkeeper who's months behind, and we're giving you CFO level data that you might have to pay $5,000 a month for, but we're only $450 a month.
Where can people find this?
Yeah, morelucro.com is our website. Morelucro.com. We have a demo video on there that kind of just walks through, how it works and how the operation is. But we surveyed hundreds of doctors and we're like, hey, if you're paying for bookkeeping, how much are you paying? The average cost was about $500. And so I said, hey, if we can do it for less and provide 100 times more value, is that something you're interested in? And everyone was like, well, yeah, duh. So that's how we went from 0 to 500 clients, just in the last couple of years, because it really is just a value proposition that's not available in the profession. Most people, like I said, are just using a general bookkeeper in their town that's maybe doing their books. They're doing a gym, they're doing a nail salon, a sushi restaurant, and they're only doing it for the pure value of filing taxes. But when I started studying these other businesses and scaled that 1 year from 2 to 5.5 million, that's what I realized is these big businesses knew their numbers and knew what to do with them, and they took action as a result of them. And so that's really the first premise of Lucro, is to have your financial data first and foremost. Then you can get into practice data, show up rates, sign up rates, LTV. Then you can get into marketing data, cost per click, customer acquisition cost, right? But if you don't start at the high level first, that's why you're a business owner to begin with, is because the potential of revenue and profitability versus being a W-2 employee is greater. You got to start at the top there, financial data. Then you can go into practice data or marketing data. But so many people jump to those bottom levers way too fast.
Yeah, I'd be willing to bet too, business probably becomes a lot more fun when you understand your numbers and you can maybe make decisions that change those numbers, and you want to start to track it, and all of a sudden you see that big number that everybody wants to see grow, which is profit and revenue, and I'm sure business gets a lot more fun. But well, awesome, man. This has been freaking an absolute masterclass in everything from, ROI and capacity and what's actually possible for a chiropractic practice. Is there anything that we didn't cover in this conversation that you wished we would have? I know we kind of covered a lot of ground in this, but I just want to make sure that we covered everything.
I mean, I think you had great questions. I was really enjoyable talking to you. I think for me, the biggest thing that I want to leave doctors with is confidence and certainty. I think that's really what's missing in our profession to scale to the next level is just a lot of unknowns. Like I said, we went to school to become great chiropractors, but we didn't understand how to become great at running a business. And so structure, KPIs, data, a lot of doctors are like, those, I don't like data. I don't like numbers. That's not me. And I would just say, well, you might not be the best fit for an entrepreneur, if that's the case, or you just might be more, of a lifestyle business and you're just kind of okay chilling, or you need to find somebody, that can actually be the CEO of your business. If you just want to be the doctor, like there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying like that's the only end all be all is to scale a business to the next level like that. Whatever your life is and what your dream outcome and purpose and passion and your priorities are, like I want people to be 100% aligned with that. But if you want to grow, if you want to get to the next level, those are prerequisites, to scale a business to the next level. But at the end of the day, you got to have confidence, you got to have certainty to make those next level decisions, because that's investing that money into a new doctor, investing that money into more marketing, or investing something into something that you just think is a guess. I mean, that's just gambling. You can go to the casino and lose money real quick. And the same thing in business. If you actually know your numbers, the ROI of your business is going to be greater than any ROI of any stock market or any other random investment, unless you got in like NVIDIA or Bitcoin at the right time. But other than that, it's pretty much going to be impossible to beat the investment return on your own business.
Couldn't agree more, man. And honestly, I think a lot of docs can appreciate the hard truth. Thanks for doing this, man. It's been amazing. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.